We first conducted this during closed session, and this is our first run-through of an evaluation of a high school principal as a group. Afterwards, there seemed like there might have been some problems, so I did contact legal counsel to get advice on how to proceed in this manner. It is quite complicated for a principal. It's very different than what we're used to with the superintendent. It's a bifurcated process where we need to do a few things. We need to have a consensus evaluation, which is something we didn't come out of our last meeting with. Furthermore, depending on the outcome of that consensus evaluation, we need to provide the high school principal with a letter of intent and 30 days to appeal that intention. That appeal would come on April 22nd, and that would be the same time that we would take action regarding the position of high school principal. At which point from there, that would be more than 60 days from the end of the school year, which completes the bifurcated process for a high school principal. Are there any questions so far? Okay. For the consensus evaluation, I will keep it on this document, and we have to go through it line by line, unfortunately, which will be a little time consuming. How the evaluation turns out doesn't really matter necessarily. For instance, it's a one-year contract, so if the high school principal is found to be even highly effective, it doesn't mean that we need to retain the current high school principal.
Since it's my evaluation, I believe it's appropriate that I should be able to provide some documentation regarding each of the different components. And also the staff as a whole evaluated me on a confidential basis. And I think it's important that we share the results of those confidential completed evaluations.
I believe you can provide that information when we've concluded our evaluation, Mr. Westhoff.
So you don't, in other words, you're telling me that you don't want me to do it item by item, line by line, so that what people share.
Is that how you conduct evaluations with your employees, sir?
I absolutely allow them to provide documentation.
Line by line as you fill yours out?
Absolutely. I mean, when you talk about performance so that people can have some feedback, they should have an opportunity to know what the staff felt, since those are the people who work with me every day, day in and day out. And you also, I believe, I have the right to provide input and documentation as to my performance in each of these areas.
Okay, Mr. Westhoff, we have many administrators here, so let me just briefly pause for a question. Mr. Price, were you evaluated last year by Mr. Westhoff?
Last year?
Yes.
No.
This year?
Yes.
Yes. Were you evaluated? Did you give your input line by line as he evaluated you or after he evaluated you?
It was after.
It seems that our common practice would then be after, Mr. Westhoff.
I don't know what the issue is here, Dan. It seems like you're trying to prevent me from being able to share my level of performance, which I already have questions that, we already went through this process. You asked the secretary at the previous board meeting to provide a cumulative result of the high school evaluation by the staff. They did. The board was instructed to come back with completed evaluations so that they could be compiled at that point in time. They didn't show up. You then began the process and told people that they should leave and complete evaluations after that, which I objected to during that point in time, because I felt that certainly was slanted and it wouldn't be what I would call an objective evaluation, because obviously, they didn't show up with their own judgment, based on what they believe and the input that they've had from other people. So, I have several concerns about the process here, and certainly also have concerns over the fact that, I know there have been meetings that you have had with board members outside of this setting to discuss this process and discuss the contents of the evaluation.
Mr. Boyer, I'd like to interrupt you too. I'm sorry. But since you put me on the spot, if we're going to compare apples to apples, Mr. Westhoff is with me every day when he conducts his evaluation, which I don't think is the same case for board members during this evaluation of Mr. Westhoff. So if we're going to do it just like Mr. Westhoff does, maybe the board should be with him every day as well.
Yeah, that's one of the difficulties I think we're running into here. Right. That's not possible.
So I think some flexibility may be appropriate.
Yeah. I appreciate your opinion, Mr. Price. Thank you. I think we're going to go ahead and just do it line by line and forge through it, Mr. Westhoff. It's already a very uncomfortable process for the board.
So you're telling me that I'm not going to be allowed to have input?
You are absolutely going to have input at the conclusion of the evaluation.
Okay.
I'll be happy to hear all of your input. And
okay, just so the board knows that line by line I will provide input on every one of those at the conclusion of the evaluation.
That's fair.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, board members. The consensus comes out to be overall 4 ineffectives, 21 minimally effectives, 93 effective ratings, and 38 highly effective ratings. And I'll come back to that data. Maybe you might want to jot that down on something in front of you. 4 ineffectives, 21 minimally effectives, 93 effectives, 38 highly effectives. Based on that data and my understanding of this evaluative process, where highly effective is 3 points, effective 2 points, minimally effective 1 point, ineffective 0 points, it looks like a clear-cut effective overall rating to me.
My opinion is very similar. I didn't feel that he did an effective job by any means. I think that he has a lot of support here for that reason, obviously. I just feel, again, my decision was more based upon what it was taken away from superintendent position more than anything.
Anyone else?
I'd just like to say, I definitely agree with Mr. Westhoff's job performance at the high school principal's job. And I think at this point, too, that there's a lot of unknowns in this dual role at this point, but I think we're going in the right direction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're not compelled to say anything.
No, I'm wondering if it's more a reflection of our the questions we're having about Stephen doing this job is a reflection of the fact that typically the superintendent deals with the principal. The board only has one person to deal with. Now we've got 2 people to deal with. So it is a little different role for us. But, you know, these are hard times. We had to make budget decisions, and I certainly think that was something the board was willing to step up to do, is to go through the extra effort of having 2 employees instead of 1 employee. And I think the results have been highly effective. So that's my position.
Okay. Thank you. Most of my feelings I expressed throughout with my comments, evaluation. I felt that while Mr. Westhoff did an effective job as the high school principal, I did feel that this situation pulled apart the 2 roles, made things very difficult. I'll give a couple examples of my thinking. Early this school year, we had an issue at GT Norman, which is a long time. It's been a goal of this board. We've stated year after year to keep class sizes as low as possible at the elementary school. We had class sizes in our 5th grade get above 30, 32, I believe. And we met, we discussed it, we spent some time on the issue, and we just didn't have the funds to bring in that extra teacher. Based on superintendent evaluation, we shouldn't shift a teacher either. Second semester at the high school, although it was our only building that lost students, somehow we had to hire a teacher and a half to accommodate the master schedule. I just felt like perhaps if we didn't have a blended situation of superintendent and principal, we might have been a little more willing to look at some other tough decisions to solve that problem rather than the hiring situation that we got into. I think some things like a year ago we put out a millage and asked our community to support us on some structural changes. And we spent a lot of time as a group making up a list of what we thought were the most important things that we needed to do. At no point in time did we have a $26,000 plus home ec room remodel on that list. And I felt personally as though I were betraying the public, even though legally there was a legal argument made that we could take that out of curriculum and that would go from a curriculum budget for a curricular change. I understand the legal argument, but for me it didn't feel right. And I wasn't sure that that would have happened if we didn't have a dual role situation. And I guess finally, and I might not have said this before, but at this point I'm just deeply disappointed about this experiment. I sat here approximately a year ago after meeting with Mr. Westhoff and talking with him about the possibility of having Mr. Antiojo become our evaluator and solve some problems that we had in the district. But people felt it wasn't unfair, that it was unfair to have 3 principals evaluating 3 different opinions of what this or that is, just like tonight, just like we did this consensus evaluation. And we're all reasonable people, yet on some we had the whole spectrum there, just like any evaluator might, based on their own personal feelings and observations. And it seemed like we could do that and at the same time save some money and save a teaching position. I was all for that, and we talked about it, and I came here and argued for it, and I voted for it, and I supported it, and I supported it in the sense, just like we wrote in that contract, and just like we said out loud at this table, that it was a 1-year experiment. And if either party didn't feel like it worked out well, that was over, and we'd figure something else out. And it doesn't seem like that's the rules we're playing by now. It seems like, well, I guess I'll say it, it's weird as an employer, but I almost feel bullied in this situation into keeping an employee that I personally didn't feel the situation worked out with. And that really leaves me sad inside. All right, Mr. Westhoff, you have the floor to
Yeah,
talk
first of all,
about
I have a
this
question. The question is, at the beginning of this process, you said that the outcome of this is now a letter of intent that comes to me. And what does that letter of intent say? Because if I'm supposed to respond to something, I need to know what that letter of intent says.
I understand that. You'll receive that letter.
I need to know what's it going to say. And isn't that, if it's a judgment that should be made by the board, then that is a judgment that needs to be made in public. I mean, if the letter of intent is, we are not going to renew your contract for principal of the high school, that's one thing to respond to. If the other one is, we are going to renew it, that's another thing to respond to. And I apparently have this appeal period that I'm supposed to, without having any knowledge of what that is, how do you respond?
Okay, would you like to hear the letter I've prepared?
Yeah, and I find it interesting that it's prepared apparently without a vote of the board.
It's a vote of the board is not required to prepare the letter, merely the consensus evaluation, which has partially already taken place in closed session.
Okay.
Okay. This is the letter prepared by our council based on our closed session and based on the information that we shared there. Is the board comfortable with me reading the letter?
Struggling to recall exactly what was agreed upon. But maybe it'll become clear in your letter.
Well, this is such a weird situation because that was Mr. Westhoff, are we free to talk about the closed session?
Let me make some other comments before you go on and
Okay.
you read this letter. I was told at the beginning of this process that I was going to be able to provide input. Please let the minutes show that it's done. I didn't speak. I didn't have any input. I've sat here. I've listened.
You have an appeal on April 22nd.
Excuse me, at the beginning of this meeting, you said that I was going to be able to go line through line by line and have some input. You just totaled it, you completed it, you provided people with summary comments, and here we sit. So what you said was not true. All right?
I disagree.
Let's move on to a few other things. Mr. Grothy, did we need to hire the person or bring back and recall the person at the high school? Did we need that teacher? Okay. The contract, by the way, and we have to operate by a contract. Our contract says that if you have 3 hours or more, you can't do overloads, that you have to recall someone. Okay? So I followed the contract. All right? Now, Mr. Boyer also would have liked me to fill these positions by having people take classes through Michigan Virtual University. The classes that we had were all Language Arts 11B, which is the lowest level of language arts that we teach. And if we put those kids in that class, they're going to fail miserably because that's very difficult, Michigan Virtual University, and I'm not interested in setting up kids for failure. I want to make sure that obviously they succeed and we give them a chance because obviously we're talking about graduation, something that is important. Life skills. The life skills classroom, maybe we shouldn't spend money there. We have a curriculum budget. The budget is $55,000. Okay? Decide, because this year electives are in the rotation, that we would spend the money there. It seems that it's Michelle Obama's #1 item of importance, that you learn how to prepare meals for yourself, that you have healthy living. Our life skills classroom is circa 1963. It has faucets that leak. It has cupboards that are falling off, the fronts aren't there. It has countertops that are in terrible array. So did I make the judgment that that is an appropriate use? And by the way, the estimate, even though the work has still been done, is $21,435. That would be something that would be worthwhile? Absolutely. Boards of education give superintendents that then give permission to their building principals to use funds. And the board had approved, and already approved, a budget of $55,000 so that we could use it. Now, we also have used other funds. I mean, we buy basketballs, and we buy beakers, and we buy all kinds of good stuff, and we do things to improve the classrooms. That's with the budget that I have been given. So I didn't send 1 cent over what any budget that has been allowed and that I have been given to me. Not 1 cent. Not in any area at all, period. Nowhere did I in any way do that. We talk about curriculum expansion. I became the principal in August. Here we're sitting, it's March, expanding the curriculum. Well, it's nice to expand the curriculum. The only area that we attempt to do that, and I have to agree with Mr. Boyer on this one, it wasn't the best attempt or follow through with Michigan Virtual University, that we needed to have more resources to do it in an appropriate way. But curriculum expansion requires resources. And when you talk about limited amount of money and limited amount of resources, you're going to have limited curriculum expansion. I think with the staff and what we have and what we're doing, I think we're doing still a pretty darn good job. I also believe that the ALPS program has made significant improvement. Each year we have sat down with all the teachers as part of the ALPS program. We have molded that program to meet the needs of kids. We before had some issues when it came to kids not being able to take certain classes that they wanted because there were 2-hour blocks. We changed that. We adjusted that. The board has known for quite some time that we were going to do an evaluation of the success of that program, and that one of the important components that we were going to look at were certainly ACT scores. The ACT was just completed last week in the MME, so we obviously have to get that information back so we can tie it, so we can make some judgments about that. But certainly I think that program is headed in an appropriate direction and is headed in a good direction. The grant, the Orchard, I applied to Yoplait, General Mills for a $6,000 grant, got it. Doesn't cost the taxpayer a cent. That expands that program, the opportunities for kids to grow things, to evaluate things, to learn the idea of sustainability. So I think certainly that that's good, that we've done a good job there. Mr. Bomini, you asked a question about, it's kind of unusual for the staff to evaluate employees. Actually, if you look at the teacher's contract, you will find that there is a process that is mentioned in the teacher's contract that every staff has the ability to provide feedback on their administrators, and that it is expected this typically happens in the spring of the year. So it's not all that unusual. It does occur. Some buildings, I guess, are a little bit more into it than others. Sometimes the union comes forward and they complete that and they do it, sometimes they don't. And as far as, this not working, well, schools now talk a great deal about data and data-based decisions. Let's base things on data. Earlier this year, I was evaluated the board on my role of superintendent, and this is the summary comment that was shared by Mr. Boyer publicly and as part of that meeting. It says, with regard to the superintendent's formal annual evaluation, President Boyer stated that Mr. Westhoff continues to lead the district effectively through difficult economic times. Overall, Mr. Westhoff's evaluation exceeds the effective rating, and then there was no discussion. So I was evaluated effectively as superintendent. Now, the numbers and the data would show that I was rated effectively as principal of the high school. But somehow it didn't work. We made the decision based on what we've done in this district quite a few times in the last 2-3 years. And that is, we have thrown more responsibilities on every administrator's shoulders. We have asked teachers to do more. We have asked counselors to do more. We have asked secretaries to do more. And we did that to save money, because we were spending $138,000 of total compensation and went down to $20,000. I know that some people had issues with me taking $20,000 for that position. But at $138,000 and you got it for $20,000, we save the taxpayers of this district a considerable number of dollars. And now by means of the evaluation, the data, the numbers, would show that it works. But I will agree with the Board of Education, which, by the way, at that point in time was a different Board of Education because we've got some new numbers, that we talked about the fact that either party could say, if it doesn't work, maybe we don't continue to do so. Maybe we don't continue to move forward. This is a new board. They obviously have different feelings about how this has worked. However, I've already had Mr. Boyer, approaching administrators, Mrs. Harrison, about taking on additional roles without the decisions being made and talking about all these possibilities. To me, that's not the way we do business. The way you do business is before you make these decisions, you come up with some solutions to the problem. And at the Board of Education meeting that we had last night, that agenda was set by Mr. Boyer. So when it came down to the discussion about what we were going to do and how we were going to do things, that is something through emails that Mr. Boyer said that's what's going to be there, and he demanded that he have approval of the agenda. And I did find it interesting that we got in the middle of that meeting and Mr. Boyer shared, Mr. Westhoff, what should we do? He is 100% right. Our policies do indicate that when it comes to hiring and when it comes to recommendations and solutions to problems, they are to be developed and funneled through the superintendent to the Board of Education. The unique situation here is that when you either are a superintendent or you are a principal, you have job duties and responsibilities. And the job duties and responsibilities that I have principal of the high school are certainly not only to create a great environment in which the kids can learn, but also to make sure that we motivate the staff, we give the staff the resources to move forward. The thing is that as superintendent and then as principal, this board wants to have an incredible amount of input into every aspect of running the building. And typically speaking, usually that's not the way things work. Usually, as a principal or a superintendent, these things are your responsibility. You go out, you take care of them, you come up with the ideas, and then you get evaluated and provide the feedback. But this board wants to be involved in the setting of the master schedule. The board wants to be involved in, every aspect of the environment. That's a very difficult situation in which you put any administrator trying to move forward because, as an administrator to lead effectively, sometimes you're going to have to take some chances. Sometimes you're going to have to do things that maybe don't always result in what you would consider immediately success. But that's what you do because sometimes, obviously, you can fail, and you got to be willing to take risks. I'm very concerned with the situation that we have now that I have some administrators sitting in this room who are stressed beyond belief because they have been approached. They have been told that their possibility of their jobs could change next year. They're afraid that if they respond in some way that is not in the interest of what has been presented to them, that there could be some type of retaliation or some type of an effect on their future employment in this district. And flat out, that's wrong. We have a very successful elementary building in Norman. We have a very successful middle school building. We have a very successful high school. And right now, we're throwing these things up in the air, and we're willing to maybe change all of it when it's working, which is the reason I had some concerns. I mean, they tell me this is direction the way they have, and I say, well, that's great. What are we going to do? We have no answer. So I think the process other than that has been okay, other than obviously nobody's going back to change their evaluations regardless of what I say. And I see that Mr. Boyer here has a letter that's going to indicate when he reads it that they're going to recommend that they not renew the contract of principal. Though it would, I guess, show from the evaluations that it worked. Thank you.
You're welcome. We will be taking no action tonight besides giving that letter to Mr. Westhoff. And then April 22nd is when we would actually formally take action regarding the position of high school principal. Is there any?
item are we on?
We are still on item 5.0.
I still question how you have an official action that you're going to share with me in that letter of intent without having the board take official action.
I'm no expert, Mr. Westhoff. I'm basing everything I'm doing on advice of counsel. It's the first time in my years on this board that I've had to get advice of counsel, but it is a complicated process, and I'm doing exactly as I've been instructed based on our closed session. If I'm making a mistake, I'm making mistakes trying hard, trying to do the right thing, and trying to provide the least amount of embarrassment to the district, the board, our superintendent, and our high school principal. I've tried throughout this process to do that. It's been very difficult. Most difficult thing I've been involved with since I've been on this board.
Well, I for one would still like to hear comments from the public.
Well, yeah, that's 7.0.
That's next up.
But just before we move from 5.0, just a moment, sir. Does the board have anything else on item 5.0? Okay. Let's move this to item 7.0, which is communications from the public. I see we don't have a huge number of people here, and most of you are familiar to us, as most of you are employees of the district. So if you'd like to comment, if you would just stand and state your name for the record, for Ms. Woodside for the recording, please feel free. There's a 10-minute limit, but I don't think we'll run into any trouble. We know each other. Mr. Price?
I'm Monty Price. I'm very confused. The only majority I've heard today is that the evaluation was effective.
That is correct, Mr. Price. But an effective evaluation does not necessarily extend a contract.
Okay, I understand that.
Okay.
I guess I would like to hear from, I think the board owes it to me as a community member to state their position on whether that should be renewed or not.
That's a fair question. I'll answer it. I would suggest we don't renew it for the reasons that I stated during the evaluation. The conflict of interest, as well as the importance of the superintendent's role, and the fact that while it saves money on one hand, we may have lost money on the other hand by a lack of focus there. Is that helpful, Mr. Price?
That's one of the 7, yeah.
I won't force other board members to speak to this unless they want to. But I appreciate
I think
your
it would be
question.
very appropriate. I think they deserve to provide the community with their opinion of this situation.
I think I did earlier, but I can say it again. I don't think that even though it was effective on his evaluation, there were some things that happened in the school district that I don't think would have happened if we'd had 2 separate people doing the job. And so I have to agree with Mr. Boyer that I would not put in to renew the principal thing. So
I'd like to say that I would put him back in as the position of the high school principal. I don't think at this point yes, there might have been a few hurdles to get over. I think we've gotten over these hurdles at this point. There might be smaller hurdles that come up in the future, which there's going to be, because this is not a set in stone proposition. But I believe that we've done fairly well with what we've had to work with, and I, for one, would like to see us continue down this path that we're in.
Thank you, Mr. Price. And feel free to make another comment later if you'd like to. Are there any other public comments?
I would comment. Excuse me.
You're not a member of the public, Michelle. You're free to comment.
I thought the board was commenting.
The board, I'm not going to compel the board. The board is under no compulsion to do so.
Okay.
You may, but you're not compelled to be clear. This is probably the most difficult $18 anybody up here has ever earned. Mr. Charlotte, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to see, I'm glad you guys had a meeting tonight, because I couldn't make one last night, because I had council meeting.
We did get your letter, sir, thank you.
Yeah. And you guys, for one thing, you are a board just like the council, and we don't run the day-to-day operations. And a few of you had seen that. And at first, if you would have told me I'd be up here agreeing with Jim Dawson, got rid of him, I'd say no way. And being up here being friends with Steve, I'd say no way. But this thing has worked. And to have someone under 20,000 make it work, okay, you got complaints. The student lounge, I went to Rockford with that, and I was dead set against it. I want it in the library, because you walk out every day, you see the kids with Wesco cups. That money could be coming back to the school, and with the school budget, we could have money to buy maybe teachers in their classrooms flat screen TVs. And you said, you know, the way I see you evaluating, you're a part-timer, Mr. Boyer, and you got a grudge or bone to pick.
A couple of comments that I would make is, first of all, to the board, thank you for serving. I watched my dad serve on the board, and I watched what it did. You can divide a community. I guess that's why I'm here, is I don't want to see this community divided over this. And I hope we can take it to a better spot. You know, one thing I would comment on evaluations, and I've done a lot and I've participated in a lot, and you need a lot of details, and you need to work with the person to get better. And I don't know to the extent that we've done that, but you need that data so that, because you want people to get better. And I think everybody up here is trying to do the right thing in their hearts. And what I fear now is that, you know, pride or the conflict, which I can feel in this room, is going to take us to a bad spot. We're going to use all these resources in a great community, and it's going to turn negative. And that's not good. And I would only ask that we think about the kids and setting that example for our kids of how can we take this to a better spot. And it's going to take some give from everybody. But I do ask you to consider that before we tear this community apart over this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Rippo. We'll leave item 7.0 open while Mr. Dawson makes his comment.
Well, I mean, you know, I've been on the board for, 8 years, and this certainly is, in my opinion, much more of a micromanagement board than past boards have been. So I think, you know, Steve is the same person who's would have been judged successful by other boards. The difference is the people doing the judging. But I question the sincerity when, you know, we've heard that this home ec renovation is a significant issue, when I think it's been pretty clear that it hasn't even been done. So I guess I'd say, do we feel that is that much of an issue that somebody wants to say, oh, I don't think we should do that? I think deep down we all think that, yeah, you know, upgrading that room probably is not too bad of an idea. So why beat somebody up for following through on what was a good idea? And if you don't think it's a good idea, then let's not spend the money. But this is what Mr. Repo was talking about when he says, you know, work on identifying problems and improving them versus just throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I hear what you're saying, Mr. Dawson. Of course, that wasn't the only thing I cited, and I think you were a part and parcel to some of those discussions about that, and it just often feels like, you know, even if there is some disagreement about something like that, it just doesn't matter if there is. That's not something we approve. We don't approve whether or not that gets done. I agree with that principle, Mr. Dawson. I truly do. That is a superintendent's decision. I just don't know if it would be a superintendent's decision if they weren't also the high school principal.
Would you agree it's the right decision to make?
No, I do disagree with the decision, to be honest, just because I believe when we made that list a year ago, if truly that thing was so important, it would have made that list. I don't know why it didn't, you know? And we've had a lot of discussion about this, whether or not it's curriculum or whether or not it's a remodel. But I don't want us to get bogged down in just one little issue, you know? There's a lot of staff here, and this is such a weird situation. I don't even know why you're here. I don't know if you're here just to show your support for Mr. Westhoff. I don't know if you're here because you're curious. I don't know if you're here because you think the parents might be fighting and you want to see what's going on. I don't know. But I'll say this. Don't be intimidated. You know, we've had a couple of administrators speak. I don't think there'll be any hard feelings from this board if you want to say anything to us. I'm fairly thick-skinned, although I'm sad right now about all this. But if you have anything you want to say, by all means.